When Galadriel addresses Adar and his children as orcs, he corrects her saying, Uruk, we prefer Uruk. But we also know about another kind of orcs called the Uruk-Hai. Who are these guys? Well, they mostly appear in the live-action movies and seem to be way more advanced than their other brethren. Advanced in the sense, they have far superior strength, stamina, speed, and also a resistance to sunlight. How did this happen? What's the secret behind the increased abilities of the Uruk-Hai? Well, in this video, I'll be talking about this, and diving into the varied differences between the Uruk and the Uruk-Hai, be it their origin, creation, army, or nomenclature. So without further ado, let's begin. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. How are we certain that Uruk and the Uruk-Hai are different? Now, despite 6 movies and a couple seasons of a live-action show, people still believe the Uruk and Uruk-Hai are the same. So, I'd like to take this opportunity to once and for all prove that these two are different. In fact, I would use the source material to prove things. I mean, Mr. Tolkien's source material. So the third chapter from the first book, The Two Towers, is called Uruk-Hai. Not Uruk, not Orc, but Uruk-Hai. I'm sure Tolkien wanted the distinction to be visible. It speaks about Pippin and Merry being kidnapped by orcs, who were being led by Uruk, who in turn followed Saruman. On the other hand, the second leader was Grishnak, who was from Mordor. These two leaders and their followers constantly argued and struggled against each other, and it's all there in the book. In fact, there are more divisions of the orcs such as bulldogs, eastern orcs, half-orcs, hobgoblins, Isengarders, etc. But that's not what we're here to discuss. So, although in Tolkien's Middle-earth, the terms Uruk-Hai and Uruks are often used interchangeably by casual readers, they actually refer to distinct types of orcs with notable differences. Understanding these nuances helps appreciate the diversity and complexity of Tolkien's orcish creations. The Uruk-Hai, as repeatedly emphasized and spoken about in The Two Towers, are Saruman's elite orc soldiers. They are a special breed, stronger and more disciplined than regular orcs, and were engineered by Saruman for their superior fighting abilities. Uruk, who as I mentioned earlier was a leader of the Uruk-Hai, proudly states that they are the fighting Uruk-Hai. I mean, to quote Uruk directly, he says, "We are the fighting Uruk-Hai. We slew the great warrior. We took the prisoners. We are the servants of Saruman the Wise, the White Hand, the hand that gives us man's flesh to eat." This only throws light on their role as Saruman's enforcers, trained for battle and loyal to his command. Saruman's Uruk-Hai are known for their resilience. They can march during the day and night without tiring, unlike other orcs who are more limited by sunlight and exhaustion. In contrast, the Uruks or Uruks of Mordor are another breed of orcs created by Sauron and first seen during the reign of Denethor I, as noted in The Return of the King. These orcs are also powerful and known for their large size and strength, but they serve Sauron and come from Mordor. Unlike the Uruk-Hai, who are specifically tied to Saruman and Isengard, the Uruks represent a more general type of orc loyal to Sauron's forces. They're described as black-skinned, brutal, and efficient in battle, such as during the Siege of Gondor, where Pippin confronts the overwhelming threat of these black Uruks. As a confirmation, in the chapter The Bridge of Khazad-dûm, Gandalf says there are orcs, very many of them, and some are large and evil, black Uruks of Mordor. So yeah, although both are strong and brutal fighters, their allegiances set them apart. In short, Uruk-Hai are Saruman's specialized fighting force, while Uruks are a broader, earlier breed tied to Sauron's dominion. Both types of orcs contribute to the larger battle for Middle-earth, but their origins, leaders, and specific traits make them distinct within Tolkien's world. And that's pretty much what we're gonna learn about. The respective origins and creators of the Uruk and the Uruk-Hai are quite different. The origins of orcs remain largely uncertain, but it's believed that Morgoth, after discovering the elves, twisted some into orcs through cruel torture in his fortress of Utumno. Orcs first served Morgoth during the First Age, particularly in the battles of Beleriand, and later became the backbone of Sauron's forces in the Second and Third Ages. In the Second Age, Sauron reappeared in Middle-earth, claimed Mordor, and constructed Barad-dûr. The orcs became a major part of his army, particularly during the War of the Elves and Sauron. However, despite the overwhelming number of orcs, the combined might of the elves and Númenóreans defeated him. After this defeat, Sauron returned in a dark guise to subdue more eastern orcs who initially scorned him. Orcs continued to be central to Sauron's armies through the Third Age, with Mordor becoming desolate after the War of the Last Alliance. The surviving orcs were concentrated in the Misty Mountains, and under Sauron's growing influence from Dol Guldur, their numbers rose again. By TA 2475, 5, a tougher breed of orcs called Black Uruks appeared, bred specifically to fight men and further bolster the armies of Mordor and Isengard under Saruman's rule. These would become the Uruk-Hai. The Uruk-Hai were created possibly through crossbreeding orcs with men or goblin men to serve as elite soldiers for evil's armies. In Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy, Saruman appears to believe that he invented the Uruks. Gandalf mentions that Saruman bred them to combine the strengths of orcs and goblin men, while avoiding their weaknesses. However, the book The Lord of the Rings, Weapons and Warfare clarifies that Saruman was merely replicating Sauron's method. Sauron's Uruks, seen in The Return of the King, have rougher appearances compared to Saruman's Uruk-Hai. In the films, Saruman's Uruk-Hai are depicted emerging from the mud, inspired by Tolkien's early descriptions of orcs, coming from the ground like maggots. These warriors were stronger, taller, and less affected by sunlight than regular orcs. In fact, the Uruk-Hai viewed their lesser cousins with disdain, and did not refrain from even killing and eating them. I'm sure cannibalism is not much of a moral issue when you're an Uruk. The Fellowship first encountered the Uruk-Hai at Amon Hen, where the creatures kidnapped Merry and Pippin and mortally wounded Boromir, though these Uruk-Hai were later wiped out by Éomer and his Rohirrim. Saruman's threat continued. He soon unleashed his entire army of Uruk-Hai on Rohan, and forced the people to seek refuge at Helm's Deep. Here at Helm's Deep, the Uruk-Hai attacked with overwhelming numbers, and despite the bravery of Rohan's forces, they were slowly being overturned. Just as defeat seemed imminent, Gandalf and Éomer arrived with reinforcements. The surprise attack broke the Uruk-Hai's confidence, sending them into a disorganized retreat. Many were killed by the Rohirrim, while the rest were slaughtered by the Huorns of Fanghorn. This basically ensured that they did not regroup to attack Helm's Deep once again. What secrets lie in their names? In Tolkien's Sindarin language, the word for orc is orch, the plural of which would become yurch. Later in his writings, Tolkien preferred to spell it as orc to ensure the C was pronounced as a hard K sound. The origin of the word ties back to the idea of a boogeyman, something that provokes fear, seen in the Quenya cognate Urko. In Old English, orc also meant demon. The term Uruk-Hai translates to orc folk in the Black Speech, which is what the Uruk-Hai called themselves. Tolkien explained that English was used to represent the various languages in his works, and goblin was often the word he used to describe orcs, especially in The Hobbit. He also occasionally used goblin in The Lord of the Rings, such as when describing the Uruk-Hai soldiers as goblin soldiers of greater stature. This shows Tolkien's flexibility in terms to fit different contexts, while maintaining the dark and fearsome nature of these creatures. And if there's one thing we know about Tolkien, it's that he loved languages and loved to play with words. Moving on. How do the varying sets of strength and abilities come into play? I believe I've made it abundantly clear how the Uruk-Hai are superior to the regular orcs or Uruks in terms of strength, speed, stature, etc. Furthermore, they even have an immunity towards sunlight. I'll explore this further when I speak about how the Rings of Power's orcs are different from the orcs in the Lord of the Rings movies. For now, let's focus on their armies. How are the two armies different? Saruman's Uruk-Hai army is a brutal and well-structured force with various specialized units. The Berserkers are the most fearsome, larger, stronger, and more vicious than regular Uruk-Hai. They shave their heads, fill their helmets with human blood to incite a frenzy, and wield double-bent swords designed to hamstring or disembowel horses. Their immense strength allows them to decapitate humans easily, and their blades are sharp enough to slice through even steel armor. The Berserkers are especially feared by their enemies, the Rohirrim. Sappers handle the ballistae, ladders, and Saruman's bombs, while pikemen and crossbowmen provide ranged and melee support. The standard Uruk-Hai infantry wield swords and shields that maximize their strength, easily severing limbs or heads. Their shields, often bladed, are used for both defense and offense, as seen during Aragorn's battle with Lurtz at Amon Hen. These shields are durable and designed to block attacks and strike when other weapons are lost. The scouts wear lighter armor, made from leather and chainmail, allowing for speed and agility. Armed with short swords, axes, and powerful yew bows, they're well equipped for quick strikes and ranged combat. Their armor is practical, with protection for both the torso and arms, while their footwear consists of sandals and puttees, covered by foot and leg armor for mobility. The Uruk-Hai serve Saruman and take pride in their loyalty to the White Hand of Isengard, as seen in their jeers during battles like Helm's Deep. The Uruks, however, are tied to Sauron's will, and are driven by his dark power. You could say that the generic Uruk was a less organized soldier, both individually and as a unit. How are the Rings of Power's orcs different from the Lord of the Rings movies? In the Rings of Power, Adar's orcs differ wildly from those in the Lord of the Rings. Unlike Peter Jackson's films, where orcs handle daylight just fine, Adar's soldiers are more sensitive to sunlight, closer to Tolkien's original books, where orcs hated the sun. The sensitivity could be linked to Adar's orcs being from Morgoth's Dark Era, possibly explaining why they haven't adapted to sunlight as later generations did. Physically, these orcs are rougher and more beastly, fitting their earlier timeline. Culturally, Adar's orcs are different because they seek independence and a safe haven, unlike the mindless, order-following orcs seen under Sauron. In J.R.R. Tolkien's works, orcs serve a fairly straightforward role as foot soldiers for the forces of evil, giving heroes like Aragorn and the Fellowship something to fight against. Though Tolkien provided some backstory on orcs, their primary function is to exist as enemies. However, Amazon's The Rings of Power takes a different approach, and offers a more nuanced portrayal of orcs. In the show, orcs are given more depth, shown as having families and a desire for homeland. For instance, viewers see a baby orc with its protective parents, which basically goes on to humanize the race beyond their typical villainous roles. I mean, in the second season's episode 7, Adar even sheds a tear for one of his dead children, and the others seem visibly angry and disappointed at Adar's fixation on annihilating Sauron, which basically means that more of the Uruk would die. One of his children even asks Adar if he truly loved them. Despite this added complexity, the orcs remained aligned with darkness, but their motivation now centers around survival and seeking a land where they can live freely. Mordor. Mount Doom's ash clouds block the sun, which allows orcs to move in daylight without harm, which ties into their desire for a homeland. This deeper portrayal complements the wider narrative of the Lord of the Rings and makes their struggle more relatable. While still evil, orcs are now shown as a race trying to survive, unlike the Uruk-Hai, who remain the brutal, mindless killers that Tolkien initially described in his books. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.